right, it is 3 minutes after the hour, and I want to welcome everyone to the Optimized Strategic Plan community meeting. This is a community introduction to Pasadena's Optimized Strategic Plan toward clean energy and really a community conversation. So we've got quite a bit of material for you this evening. We have a number of subject matter experts and our executive team as well. But before we proceed, I'd like to turn it over to our city manager, Mr. Miguel Marquez, for some welcoming remarks.
Hi, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much. Yeah, I know I'll be short because I know everybody wants to get to talking about the optimized strategic plan. But I thought it's important to sort of lay the context. I think you called it a community meeting or community gathering, and that is so important and so critical because that's what happens when you have a municipal owned utility like we do. We're very blessed to have one, and it means a lot of different things. So, let me give a quick highlight and just say that I'm being informed that in just a few short weeks, we're going to celebrate Public Power Week. And I think we should take that to heart and really celebrate it because having a municipal utility means so much. And many of you know, and if you don't know, I actually came to Pasadena a little more than 2 years ago, but came from Northern California, where there's very, very, very few cities that have their own power utility. I was living in San Jose. The city of Santa Clara had one, but that's all that comes to mind in all of the Bay Area. The rest is done by PG&E. And I got to tell you, it's a very different exercise when it comes to things like an optimized strategic plan and other goals that we set for ourselves. We're community owned, we're not for profit, and we're locally controlled so that we can serve the community. I think that has implications for things like rate stability, for accountability, transparency, for our ability to support jobs in the community, and essentially to operate in ways that align with community priorities. And in the process of getting this done, we're also a utility that does its business in the public. We're open to any number of open meetings laws and records laws. And we really, like this meeting tonight, value community participation to make sure that, I call it client-centered design in many respects. We want to make sure that the operations the city undertakes really have at its core the clients that we serve. So tonight's presentation will reiterate all of these goals and our plans for the future. Your input is a critical part of this process as we continue to build this optimized strategic plan together. So, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to your continued participation in this important discussion.
Great. Thank you for that, Mr. City Manager. And I neglected to introduce myself during this evening. So my name is Jennifer Guess-Mayo. I'm the Assistant General Manager of External Affairs for the department here tonight. And we're going to go ahead and get this presentation started. So we're going to start with some housekeeping items first. And for everyone on the meeting, we are going to be posting a copy of the slides of this presentation on the website, and that's pwpweb.com/OSP. You don't have to write it down. We're going to have a little bit more of that in the slide later on. And we also are recording this meeting. So we will also, in addition to posting the slides, we will be posting a copy of this recording to that same website as well. It may take a few days because we need to make sure that the recording is ADA compliant and that the closed captioning reads accurately and flows well for those who need it. There will be 3 opportunities to provide feedback this evening. There are going to be 2 structured question and answer sessions, about 15 minutes each during the presentation, basically the first half, second half. And then, of course, after the presentation, we're going to have a third Q&A session and time for some general comments and discussion. Now, during the Q&A session, we will enable the raise hand feature so that you can indicate if you have a question or want to provide a comment. I'll call on the attendees in the order that they are received, and our Zoom gurus will open the line so that you can speak and ask your question. And because we have a lot of material to go through tonight, for each raised hand, we do ask if you could please limit your questions. We'll have establishing about 3 minutes max to ask your questions and to allow enough time for our team to provide answers, because we really want everyone here to have an opportunity for everyone to participate. And of course, we're scheduled to end around 7:30 this evening, but if there are some additional questions or comments you have afterward, you see the email address up there. for our team, we can certainly take feedback afterward, and that'll also be provided as well. So again, no need to write that down. So next, I would like to introduce our interim general manager / assistant city manager, Mr. David Reyes, and who are going to be taking up the slides now.
Thank you, Jennifer, very much. And thank you, Miguel, for those introductory remarks. One of the things that is truly unique about what Miguel said is the community's involvement in all aspects of city government, but especially as it relates to water and power, through the efforts of ultimately the city council, but much lobbying by community advocates. We have adopted, and the city staff is working to implement, and that's what we're going to be covering tonight, implement the requirements that are set forth in Resolution 9977, which really speaks to a couple of different ideas, but most notably trying to be carbon-free, be a carbon-free utility by the year 2030, well ahead of any state mandates, but also keeping in mind reliability, sustainability, and affordability. And so those are really our challenges, and that's what the OSP is going to be focusing on, is looking at those aspects. Through the good work and prudent policies of the City Council, PWP has for many years now been working towards green energy, and it appears that as it stands today, if we did nothing else, that by the year 2030, we would be between 86 and 90% carbon free in terms of our energy. And that's a big deal. And so I think it's also important to highlight that means that what we're really trying to talk about and focus on is that last 10%, and how do we get there? And what solutions are going to exist today that maybe don't, or exist tomorrow that don't exist today? And we know that there's lots of different solutions and ideas that are out there. Some are viable, some are not. Some are available commercially, some are not. And we want to hear from you as we present our experts this evening. But we want to share what we've done thus far. Like so many other aspects of Pasadena city government, the work that's going to be shared tonight has been directed through the efforts of both MSC, which is our Municipal Services Committee, in conjunction with community input, as well as the City Council. And so we have a scope of work that has been approved by the City Council, and we're working towards completing that. And we really wanted to share progress and update tonight in terms of where we are. And I want to take a moment to share our team, the team leaders that have been working so hard on this as well. Miguel has touched on a lot of, go back just one slide just for a second, Jason. I think Miguel has touched on so much of how important it is to have our own utility. You often hear that Pasadena punches above its weight, and we have our own health department, one of 3 cities in the entire state that has its own health department, and one of a few utilities that's both not-for-profit and community-owned. You see some numbers here that are, by all accounts, impressive for a city our size. And we do all of that. I think I want to jump towards the bottom of the slides. A credit rating of AA+. This RP3 Diamond Award is the industry's highest award for reliability. And what's not listed on here is that when you compare our rates to those of our surrounding neighbors, we are towards the bottom in terms of being affordable. And so you combine the reliability with the affordability and the customer service that we provide, along with being a state leader, if not a nation leader, in terms of being green, carbon-free green energy. You have a utility that reflects the values of this community as well as the City Council. And so as we think about the next slide and just identify some of the key players, I just really want to recognize Kelly Wen on this next slide, who is our AGM. The way that the water and power is divided up, we have multiple. I'm the interim general manager. I've been lucky enough to be in that role for a number of months now. It is an interim role, and there are a number of AGMs that are subject matter experts. Kelly Wen is our expert over power supply and is leading the efforts along with her team tonight in terms of the OSP. We see our other AGMs. Stacy Takiguchi is our Chief Assistant General Manager, and she's also in charge of water. Vrujan Avidian is Assistant General Manager for Power Delivery. Lynn Chamowitz for Finance and Administration. And then Jen Guest-Mayo, who you heard is our AGM for External Affairs. Jerry Marquette has his hands in almost every aspect of the department's doings and oversees both customer service and technology. And with that introduction, we see the resource planning team that's listed pretty small. I don't know if you can see it on your screens if you're watching on your phones, but there's a really important team behind the scenes, Robert Castro, John Hermosi, Jason Tarazi, and Mark Webster, who are really behind the scenes helping to make what we do possible. So I wanted to give some recognition and credit to those that are really doing the work. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Kelly Wen, AGM for Power Supply.
Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate that. Good evening, and thank you all for joining us this evening. My name is Kelly Wen, Assistant General Manager of Power Supply. To begin, I would like to highlight Pasadena's Resolution 9977. In January of 2023, the Pasadena City Council passed Resolution 997, which declared a climate emergency and set a goal to source 100% of Pasadena's electricity from carbon-free sources by the end of 2030. The City Council directed the City Manager's Office to utilize the 2023 Integrated Resource Plan process to plan multiple approaches to transition to this goal and to optimize affordability, rate equity, stability, and reliability while achieving this goal. Next slide. So on December 11, 2023, the City Council approved and adopted the 2023 Integrated Resource Plan, or IRP. And upon approval of the IRP, the City Council issued guidance to use a third party with expertise in green energy to develop an optimized strategic plan, or OSP. Next slide. So a little bit about what this will accomplish. So City Council approved a contract with Energy and Environmental Economics, Inc., or E3, to perform multiple studies that will examine and explore the optimal set of actions for PWP to take in transitioning to a clean energy future as referenced on the slide, such as projected future energy demands and distributed energy resources. The OSP will lay out the key steps and future decisions needed to achieve the goals of Resolution 9977. So measuring progress to our carbon-free electricity. So in addition, as part of the approval of the 2023 IRP, the City Council also requested that PWP develop a dashboard to track our progress toward meeting the carbon-free goals of Resolution 9977. So here we have the Clean Energy Tracker, which we believe includes good, relevant metrics to help us track and communicate our progress. The tracker depicts key targets and milestones tracking our progress toward achieving the carbon-free goals. Our goal is to update the tracker approximately every 3 months or whenever new information will become available. So first, metric number 1 demonstrates progress towards Senate Bill 100, which is a state compliance. We currently are forecasting to exceed the SB 100 target of 100% renewable and zero carbon by 2045 goal in 2030, which is 15 years ahead of the mandate. So this metric shows how PWP's decarbonization efforts compares with and exceeds California's compliance requirements. So next, metric number 2 demonstrates progress towards carbon-free generation. So this metric focuses on PWP's energy portfolio and how resource investments that we make impacts its overall carbon-free percentage. So as of today, we forecast that 94% of our annual generation portfolio will be carbon-free by 2030. And lastly, metric number 3 demonstrates progress toward average hourly matching. Metric number 3 depicts progress toward decarbonizing our energy delivery on an hourly basis. We are currently forecasting that an average of about 88% of delivered energy will be carbon-free for all hours in a year by 2030. So as you all can see, Pasadena has been and continues to be a leader in the clean energy transition. We have been working hard for the last few years to replace the Intermountain Power Plant, a baseload resource, meaning that it can produce energy 24/7, which is terminating in the year of 2027 with replacement with renewable energy resources. So you can view this information by visiting the Clean Energy Tracker on our PWP website. Okay, so we are ready for our first Q&A break. We'll take 15 minutes to answer questions during the session. So please ask questions by using the raise hand feature and you'll be called to unmute yourself. So please keep questions to under 2 minutes to allow others a chance to speak. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions.
Okay, so it looks like, first of all, thank you, AGM Wen, for that very thoughtful information and for transitioning us into this very first break. We have a couple questions so far. The first is from Pixel 3XL. So if you want to go ahead, I think you can unmute yourself, or Tommy, if you can unmute them, please go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, I'm not sure if this is the appropriate point in this presentation to be asking about this, but this is specific to PWP policy in reference to residential distributed solar. And it doesn't seem to come out, excuse me, in any of these meetings, certain policy in which PWP is a massive outlier in context to pretty much any of the utilities in the region, and certainly compared to the IOUs. And that is a cap, a hard cap of 105% for any residents wanting to install solar in their home. And when I talk about 105%, I'm talking about their historical usage. And what ends up happening with this hard cap, it means that anybody in Pasadena who installs rooftop solar within a year or two is actually running in deficit. They're not 100% offsetting their energy usage. They're not completely neutralizing their carbon. They're not achieving their economic goals. And what happens is that with each passing year, a greater percentage of their energy expense is coming from the grid rather than the rooftop. And if you compare this to, for instance, the nearest major IOU, Southern California Edison, they will allow virtually, with just a affidavit on the behalf of the customer saying that they're going to use the energy, they'll allow up to 150% of historical usage. And, of course, the best, the cheapest electron is the one that's not used. And we're talking about behind the meter distributed energy, 100% renewable. It doesn't impose stress on the local infrastructure. It does completely the opposite. It's 100% aligned with the alleged goals of Pasadena Water and Power and Pasadena writ large. But here we are, huge outlier, hard fixed limit. And it's really terrible. It's a terrible experience for people going solar from a residential perspective. How can you justify that? Who's responsible for changing that?
Thank you for that question and comment. So PWP, we are studying the matter. We'll be furthering our education on through this OSP and upcoming cost of service and electric rate studies and upcoming state law and regulations and so forth. And it is a policy matter that we will be taking up with City Council, making a recommendation eventually to City Council. So if anyone else on the panel would like to add anything to that, please do so. Varujan, do you want to maybe add anything?
Hi, this is Varujan Avedian. I'm the Assistant General Manager for Power Delivery. Yeah, Kelly is absolutely correct. So, and actually, we're doing a we're planning on doing an educational presentation or informational presentation to the Municipal Services Committee regarding this matter. So I invite you guys to attend that meeting. Currently, we're targeting toward the end of next month to do that presentation. And there will be some educational matters there as far as the impact on, specifically the impact on distribution systems. So I invite you all to attend that meeting.
Great. Thank you both for your comments there. We do have two other questions in the queue, so I'd like to call on Ms. Sandy Krasner next. Krasner, pardon my pronunciation.
Can you hear me?
Sure can. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I'd like to get a clarification, understand the metrics you were referring to. Metric number 2, if I understand it, is the percent of total energy generation that's carbon-free from owned and contracted resources, which means that doesn't include resources on the spot market. Is that correct? So it's the percentage of our total megawatt hours that are carbon-free.
That is correct.
Not including spot market purchases, correct?
That is correct, sir.
And then number 3 is the number of hours across the year that are carbon-free. But again, that's from owned or contracted resources, and that doesn't include spot market purchases?
Yes, it's we are serving with our own and contracted resources to serve our load. So spot market purchases are not necessary if we're able to serve our load 100%. Of course, we're not 100% yet, but if we were at 100%.
Okay. And the reason that spot market purchases are not included in the carbon accounting is because you don't have any control over how they're generated?
That's correct. We don't have any control over that. All we can control is procuring enough clean energy to meet our load, whether it's on an annual basis, whether it's on an hourly basis, and that's what the metrics show. But the second metric is to show how we are decarbonizing our portfolio. The purpose of that metric is to show everything that we have contracted, what we are expecting to be carbon-free.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
Thank you. So next up in the queue is Michael Burris.
Hi. I would like to know that in the demand forecasting that you're doing, to what extent that takes account of climate change and the things like the fairly predictable summers in Pasadena that will be comparable to Phoenix, Arizona in, we don't know how long, but at some point in the future. And also Pasadena is blessed to be in the foothills of the San Gabriel Mountain. And what mountains? And would it be possible to do some degree of a pumped hydro energy storage pilot or demonstration project so that we could gather all the solar energy and put it somewhere in Pasadena in some, not too distant future? The whole balancing the grid, all this 20th century point of view where power is something you dig up and burn versus something you create and store, is just, I know everyone cares about the few cents their electric bill goes one way or another, but these are much more important issues. And civilization is stuck right now in as it always has been, being energy impoverished. No one was maybe walking around in 1924 thinking they were energy impoverished, but then that was peak horse in America, right? There wasn't just Tommy guns and gangsters and bootleggers, and the urban centers were cleaned up, but it wasn't until 1930 that the number of automobiles exceeded the number of domestic horses. A couple horsepower available to most people. So, and when you look at Google Maps of Pasadena, there's vast acreage of flat-roofed industrial and commercial buildings with no solar panels whatsoever. These are ideal locations to be gathering and storing energy. This is where this century is going, but how can a town like Pasadena look at have a maybe a decade or 2 decade point of view? Thanks.
Well, thank you so much for your input. We appreciate that, and we'll definitely take note of that.
Great, thank you. I don't see any additional hands raised. So with that, we're going to go ahead and close this first Q&A break. We do have 2 additional ones coming up, and we're going to go ahead and proceed with the presentation. So I'll turn it back to AGM Kelly Wynn.
All right, thank you, Jen. So next, I would like to introduce Nick Schlag, who is a partner with E3, to explain where we are and how we're progressing into this OSP, or Optimized Strategic Plan. Nick, go ahead.
Thank you, Kelly. Good evening, everyone. As Kelly said, my name is Nick Schlag. I'm a partner with E3 and really pleased to be here with you all tonight to share a little bit about the work that we have underway and that will be coming over the course of the next year as we work towards this optimized strategic plan. Let's jump ahead maybe 2 slides. And as we're getting there, I'll just note we've got 3 sort of sections to our presentation tonight. The first is just a little bit of background about E3 and the experience that we have that's relevant to some of the questions facing the city. The second is a discussion or a deeper dive into the specifics of the Pasadena system and the challenges it faces as it pursues its ambitious climate goals. And the third is actually a deep dive into our work plan to develop this optimized strategic plan that David and Kelly and others on the call so far have described at a high level. So I'll take you through the first 2 sections, and then one of my colleagues will take you through the third one tonight. So I'll start with just a little bit of the background on E3. We're a consulting firm with offices in several places throughout the country. I'm based in our San Francisco office, which is our first and biggest office, along with a number of our other team members. Our focus as a company is supporting utilities and policymakers and NGOs and a wide range of different clients as they try to answer these really hard questions about how can we achieve really ambitious transitions in the energy sector, achieve very ambitious clean energy goals. So many of our studies focus on these sort of long-term questions about how to decarbonize the economy as a whole or the power sector, while prioritizing the types of goals that you've already heard about tonight with respect to affordability and reliability. Next slide. We have a big team working on this project because this is an expansive effort. The scope of what we're trying to accomplish here is itself very large. So this is my team, all the folks that are contributing to this work. Again, I'm a partner overseeing this work, but we've got a very large team of SMEs, subject matter experts, and managers contributing to the work that we're doing here. With me tonight, we have Mike Sontag, who's going to lead us through the third part of this presentation. But you can see the faces. I won't run through all the names here because there are so many of the folks that are really working to support the city in this broad and expansive effort. Next slide. So as we talk about experience, I wanted to just bring forward a couple of the types of engagements that we've worked on previously that I think are relevant to the questions that we're facing here, and just tell us a little bit about what we can expect as we start to explore what it takes to decarbonize that last 10% that David referenced in his introductory remarks. We have been working with the California Public Utilities Commission as the lead technical consultant in the integrated resource planning proceeding since 2016. And in our role in that proceeding, what we've been doing is helping the state as a whole construct portfolios of resources that help the state or are poised to help the state achieve carbon reductions within the electricity sector over time, consistent with state policy goals. And what we've learned from that modeling is very interesting. It's really that in order to achieve deep decarbonization targets within the electricity sector, we really need a diverse portfolio of resources that includes both resources that are available today, wind, solar, and battery storage, but also technologies that may not yet be available in the market. as we pursue deeper and deeper levels of decarbonization. The second study that's perhaps relevant to this specific effort is our support of the Sacramento Municipal Utilities District in its previous IRP and in its 2021 Zero Carbon Plan, where we helped that city model essentially what would it take to decarbonize its electricity supply by the 2030 timeframe. And once again, some really interesting findings coming out of that work. It's small municipal utility up in Northern California. But what we found was really affirmation of that proverbial lesson that going from 90% to 100% really marks the greatest challenge of decarbonizing the power sector. And it's really in that last sort of region that the value of those new technologies, emerging technologies that may not be there today, really comes into play. The third study that I have highlighted here is our work just next door over in Glendale. We've been working with the city of Glendale to establish a roadmap to achieve that city's goal of 10% customer adoption of behind the meter solar and storage. And so we've been doing some expansive modeling there to understand the relationship between different rate structures and how those motivate different levels of adoption of customer solar. What we've also been able to highlight in that work has been the potential opportunity for city-owned solar and storage as a contributing factor to meet that city's goals. So let's go. Yes, thank you. Wanted to talk a little bit about just common lessons that we've seen across many of our studies examining these deep decarbonization questions. We've taken on these questions for utilities and regulators across the country and even internationally. And across all of that work, what has emerged is really a common blueprint for what it takes to decarbonize the power sector that includes the 3 building blocks that you see on this slide. And I'll say up front, we list a number of technology examples with each of these building blocks. Not all of these examples are necessarily applicable in the context of Pasadena's goals. We understand that well, and we understand the imperatives of Resolution 9977. But this, you can think of this more so as a blueprint, more generally speaking, for decarbonizing the power sector. So the first category of resources that is very crucial, and when I say resource, I mean power plants essentially, are scalable, low-cost, clean energy resources. These are resources that essentially would provide significant shares of energy while producing no carbon to serve loads over the course of a year. These are things like wind and solar that I'm sure folks are hearing quite a bit about as these are being developed very rapidly. Now, these have come down considerably in cost in the past decade, but they do have some limitations in the sense that the wind doesn't always blow, the sun doesn't always shine. And so while these resources can do a lot to provide energy to the system, they can't always produce when it's needed. So in conjunction with those scalable, low-cost, clean energy resources, we need what we call balancing resources. And when I think of balancing resources, I'm typically thinking of energy storage or things that can do what energy storage can do, essentially batteries or pump storage that can charge up with surplus carbon-free energy when the grid can provide it, and then return it back to the grid during periods of high demand when perhaps the sun has set and renewables are no longer available. Many of these are now commercially available at broad scale. We've seen the rise of battery storage in California at a meteoric pace over the past few years. And so this is another sort of segment of resources that we're beginning to see develop to contribute or support broader decarbonization efforts. The third category that you see here is what we call firm resources. And when I say firm resource, what I mean is a power plant that can turn on demand and can run for as long as necessary, whether that's minutes, hours, days, weeks, or even months. Today, most of the options for firm resources are fossil-emitting power plants, but there's a tremendous amount of research, of private capital, of federal funding that's really exploring what are the potential future options for meeting this firm resource need on the power sector. And the reason that we need this, the reason that we need firm resources is that these are bone of reliability. That when the sun's not shining, the wind's not blowing, and when the batteries have run out of charge, say it's a couple days cloudy, you need something to be able to turn on to complement those first 2 categories of resources. Now, I call these building blocks, but the reality is that this is much more like a Tetris puzzle, and it's actually incredibly intricate and complex how these pieces fit together in a way to ensure reliability. So let's jump forward to the next slide, which I wanted to use to just kind of illustrate this in a more concrete way. This is zooming out from Pasadena. This is actually a broader look at the California grid, but this is a picture of what the grid looked like earlier this year, April 10th of this year, on an hour-to-hour basis over the course of the day. So each different color here represents a different type of generation, and you can see the different categories listed here. But I think this tells us a lot about how the grid of the future is essentially going to function, even though we're in kind of this transitional state, not to that endpoint yet. So we talked about the three categories of resources. You can see these here. Number one, those low-cost clean energy resources. We have tremendous amounts of solar during the middle of the day, sometimes more than we can even consume. And so there are periods in California where we're actually seeing curtailment of solar. That is to say, it's being spilled because we have more of it than we can consume. Number two, we already have significant quantities of batteries. Many of these have been built in the past 5 years in California. And these are already working to shift some of that surplus solar into that nighttime, that evening and nighttime period, and push down the reliance on fuels like natural gas. But at the bottom of this chart, number three, you can see that we still have this need for firm resources. And in particular, these are helping us serve loads throughout the rest of the nighttime period once the batteries have run out of charge. Now, this is just one day, and there are many different days of the year that look different than this, higher loads, different levels of solar generation, different levels of wind. And so you can't necessarily take this picture and generalize it as the single template for the problem that California is working to solve. But it is, I think, a very instructive picture of the direction that we're heading. Next slide. So with that broader look at California, I wanted to zoom back down to the city of Pasadena and talk a little bit more specifically about some of the challenges facing the city of Pasadena as it pursues its ambitious clean energy goals set by Resolution 9977. Let's start with the next slide. And this is just a reminder that Resolution 9977 establishes multiple planning objectives for the city of Pasadena. That in addition to the objective to achieve a carbon-free electricity supply by 2030, that this should be done in a manner that ensures reliability, that preserves affordability, and that is an equitable solution considering all of the members of the community that are contributing essentially to supporting the transition. The multifaceted nature of this planning process or of these objectives mean that this is a very complicated process where we have to balance these things against one another. It's a multidimensional problem. And really, in order to get at what you would consider an optimized plan out of all of these, it requires a comprehensive assessment of potential options and a holistic view of the system. Next slide. Just wanted to briefly note, and I'll only touch on this briefly that because it's already been said, but Pasadena's goals of carbon-free by 2030 are among the most ambitious, both in terms of the stringency of the requirement and the timing on which that goal would be achieved. And so we do see this as positioning Pasadena to be a leader in the transition, even in a state that's already set ambitious targets. So we're very excited to support the city in charting the path to work towards this goal. Next slide. David mentioned a little bit about this in his introductory remarks, and this relates to the metrics that Kelly presented just a little bit ago in her introduction as well. But I wanted to show you guys a picture of how the generation fleet serving Pasadena is already poised to transition over the next 6 years from today to 2030. What you see on the right is a chart showing the nameplate capacity of the different generation resources in Pasadena's mix, both today and in 2030. And when I say nameplate capacity, what that actually means is it's the size of the power plants, not necessarily how much energy they produce over the course of the year. So there are some really key transitions happening over this time frame owing to decisions that have already been made. One is the retirement of the Intermountain coal plant, so that disappears by 2030. And the second is that PWP has been active in signing contracts for new generation poised to come online between now and 2030 that would fulfill much of the sort of requirements set forth by the city's resolution. Significant quantities of solar and storage, and also new quantities of wind and geothermal. All of these are what bring us to the higher quantities in those metrics that Kelly was introducing in her remarks. Now, We will see as we go through this that this gets us close to 90%, but there's just a brief reminder here that that proverbial 100%, that really is the greatest challenge. And it's the reason that it's going to be such an engaging and involved process to work towards what that optimized plan looks like. Next slide. Okay, so I promise this is the most technical slide that we're going to show tonight, and then we're going to dial back from the technical details. But I think this is really instructive, and so I wanted to share it just in case this resonates with some folks in terms of understanding the nature of the transition we're facing. These are heat maps that show essentially how carbon-free the energy supply for Pasadena is poised to be. Every tiny rectangle in one of these graphics represents 1 hour of the year. If you read vertically, that's 24 hours, and horizontally, that's the 365 days of the year. Squares that are red would represent hours in which the supply of carbon-free resources is less than Pasadena's load, and squares that are green represent periods in which Pasadena's portfolio can actually produce more carbon-free electricity than it needs to serve its loads. Today, the picture is mostly red. We have a lot of red on this graph. There aren't many hours, in fact, any, where there's enough carbon-free resources to meet all of Pasadena's loads. But with those new contracts that I showed you just one slide ago, this picture changes really dramatically. And you can already see that in that 2030 timeframe, specifically owing to the large amounts of solar that has been contracted by the utility, that throughout much of the year, we're actually in green during the daytime, meaning that Pasadena's portfolio will already have more than enough energy carbon-free to serve its loads during those periods of the day. What that means is that the continued decarbonization challenge moving forward from this 83% figure, 83% of hourly matching, is not only about delivering energy during the middle of the day, but about our ability to store it and about our ability to generate electricity that's carbon-free during the nighttime and evening periods to address some of those remaining red rectangles on this graphic. Next slide. So this is just a snapshot to orient you all to what PWP's electricity system looks like in a little bit more detail. Part of our objective in this work is to ensure that we're communicating effectively and providing sort of a common set of understanding for the challenges that are facing the city. And so you can see some of the key elements of this system in a little bit more detail here. Essentially, what we're showing on the left-hand side is the local PWP system. You can think of this as almost roughly corresponding to everything within the city limits. This is where all of Pasadena's loads are. It's also where the Glenarm natural gas power plant is located at about 200 megawatts. And we've got small amounts today of local solar and battery storage resources. Now, that Pasadena system is connected to the broader California ISO, which is to say the broader California grid, through the TM Goodrich receiving station, essentially a single point of interconnection to that broader California grid that has a 280 megawatt limit. But it's in that broader California grid and even beyond where many of the resources in Pasadena's portfolio are located. Today, coal and natural gas plants, but also renewables and energy storage and some nuclear actually over in the state of Arizona. And a large amount of the energy that serves Pasadena's load is coming in through that CalISO system, through the Goodrich receiving station to serve PWP's loads internally. Now, I share this as we go to the next slide, just to get folks oriented to some of the challenges that are really specific or unique to Pasadena as it pursues the Resolution 9977 goals of 100% carbon-free. So, number one, Pasadena's ability to import generation from the California ISO is limited. The amount of capacity that we can bring through that Goodrich receiving station, 280 megawatts, is actually lower than the 330 megawatt peak that the city just experienced several weeks ago. And there are indeed conditions where that import limit through Goodrich is even lower due to contingencies on the subtransmission system within the city. What that means, as we go to the next slide, is that there really is today a need for internal resources within the city to maintain reliability. Essentially, when imports are limited or when the city's loads are peaking, we need some sort of resource within the city limits that can support those loads, that can provide the incremental energy that can't be served by imports. Today and historically, that role is fulfilled by the Glenarm natural gas power plant. but we understand very much that it's a natural gas power plant. That consumption of natural gas is incompatible with the city's goals. And so we'll be studying all kinds of alternatives to see what we can do to transition that plant away from natural gas, whether that's with a conversion or a retirement. And Mike will speak a little bit about that in a minute. Next slide. Now, doubling this challenge, or maybe compounding this challenge in terms of the need for local resources, is the fact that Pasadena is a dense urban area with limited land use or limited land available to use for power generation. A couple of our commenters have already referenced the potential for rooftop solar. And of course, that's true. And it's very much something that we're going to be considering as we begin to analyze portfolios in the optimized strategic plan. But at the same time, the density of the urban area does limit other options that other utilities may have available at their disposal as they pursue these pathways. And that's just another constraint on the planning problem that makes things a little bit more difficult. Next slide. So with these challenges and with these goals, we really have to cast a wide net when we're thinking about the solutions that could be brought to bear, that could be mobilized to help the city move towards the goals that it's set. And this wide range of solutions, our philosophy in this is essentially we want to turn over every rock, make sure we're looking under every rock for solutions that could support the city's goals. What we list here are just kind of a brief range of what's on our radar that we're already considering within the optimized strategic planning process. But we'll be looking to piece these together as we start to construct portfolios and evaluate different ways that the city could pursue, once again, the goals that it has set. And the optimized strategic plan itself is really about understanding how each of these different components can contribute or support or work together essentially in a portfolio to help the city move towards that goal. So I think that brings us to our second Q&A break. And so Jennifer, I'll turn it back to you to manage the audience.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Nick. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and open up the raised hand feature. I see a lot of folks coming in. Okay, that's great. So we'll go ahead and get started with our first question. Lee Wallace.
Thank you. I was interested in especially about the gap. And I wanted to find out, I just wanted to point out that there is, in fact, 50 acres of undeveloped land, 6 blocks north of the Glenarm power plant. That's the relinquished 710 lands. It probably would not be good for generation, but it seems like it would be a good site for battery storage or some type of storage facility. To what extent could that play a role in your planning?
Yeah, I see Kelly coming off onto camera. I think that Kelly's probably in a better position to address this one than I am.
Sure. We are going to be exploring all available potential land for our future resources that will be identified through the OSP. We have already started the project of our first local battery storage project on our power plant. The first phase, 25 megawatt system. And then phase 2 will be also on the power plant site where the old steam plant used to be. As far as other potential sites, we have been looking and we'll continue to do that. So thank you for that information. We'll definitely take that into consideration.
Thank you.
Excellent. So next up is Sam Bird.
Hello. I have a couple of quick questions. First is, do we have an estimate on how much? I know that there's going to be an upgrade to the Goodrich receiving station coming up sometime before around 2035. Do we have an estimate on how much that's going to cost? And then the second question is, I know that there's a lot of solar that is produced over the course of the day throughout the state of California to the point where you can purchase megawatt hours for getting paid $42 per megawatt hour. Is PWP considering over procuring the number of batteries to charge these batteries during the day and then selling excess electricity at night when the cost of electricity is at a premium to effectively profit off of this purchase? Thanks.
Thanks, Sam, for the question. Verujan, do you want to take the first one?
Sure. So Sam, this is Verujan Avedian again, AGM for Power Delivery. Sam, we don't have an estimate for that work yet. Our plan, basically, we came up with the master plan a couple of years ago for power delivery, and upgrade of those transformers was identified basically as the second 5 year of the master plan. And we don't have a good cost estimate for that right now. There's a lot of factors to be involved or to be considered for that project. So the short answer is we don't have a cost estimate right now to provide.
Was there a second question in there? Or did we get both of Sam's questions?
Well, I can speak to Sam's second question. I think on a general matter with respect to the negative pricing and the opportunities around batteries. It is true, especially this year, that as we've seen some of those periods where California as a state has produced more solar that it can consume, and we've seen curtailment, that wholesale electricity prices have actually gone negative, which, as Sam's question kind of indicated, means that if you're using energy, you would actually be paid to consume energy during those negative price periods. As we think about the optimization of batteries, the potential to add batteries in a portfolio and the type of modeling that we would be doing, we would certainly be accounting for not only the sort of storage of Pasadena's own resources and the discharge back to the grid, but how that battery might interact with the wholesale market. So that does factor into the economics that we'd be looking at, Sam. With that said, there's another dynamic at play here, which is the question of how much solar is Pasadena's own portfolio producing during those periods of negative pricing within the broader grid. This is kind of one of the challenges that the utilities across the West are facing right now, is that everybody is building out significant amounts of solar to decarbonize their supplies, and then finding that when they have a surplus, so does everybody else, and everybody's trying to sell. That's essentially the dynamic that leads to that negative pricing in the first place. So thanks for the question, Sam.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nick and Verujan, for your answers there. We're going to move on next to a question from Jonathan Brown.
Hi, as a owner of solar and a battery, I would very much like to see a virtual power plant option implemented by Pasadena. We would definitely love to be contributing to reducing costs for the city and for our neighbors.
Great, thank you for your comment. I didn't know, Kelly, did you have any additional thoughts on virtual power plants or looking into something that we're going to be studying later on?
Yes, absolutely. Virtual power plants is something that even the OSP is going to take a look at, and something that's definitely in the future.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Next up, another question from Sandy Krasner.
Yeah, since one of your slides referred to green hydrogen, I had some questions about hydrogen. I guess the first question is, why are you considering hydrogen as a storage medium when the efficiency is quite a bit less than batteries? Also, how do you expect that the hydrogen would be sourced? How will green hydrogen be generated? And finally, in another presentation that we saw from E3, I think to the MSC, there was a reference to using hydrogen combustion instead of fuel cells. And I'm wondering why you're considering that when the efficiency is quite a bit less and the pollution impacts are much higher. That's all I had. Thank you. Hello?
Nick, if you're speaking, you're on mute.
Thank you. I'm not sure why I muted myself, but I did. So thanks for the question, Sandy. I'm going to do my best to recall all the dimensions of that. Let's see. So with respect to green hydrogen, I would say many of the questions that you're asking are exactly the questions that we are set up to ask in the OSP, but don't yet have answers to. When we think about green hydrogen, at least generally speaking, what we're thinking of is hydrogen produced by electrolysis that's fueled with renewable generation. But we haven't yet gotten to the point in the study where we're able to get into the details of exactly how it might be sourced or transported or stored. That's work that is to be forthcoming. With respect to the question around fuel cells and combustion, we have looked at both fuel cells and combustion as options for consumption of hydrogen fuel and conversion back to electricity. And the short answer to this question is that if you recall kind of the dynamics of those three different building blocks that I listed up front, the low cost clean energy resources, the balancing resources, and the firm resources, what we're looking for in our studies is really options for those firm resources that can turn on when needed, but actually also turn off when necessary. Most fuel cell technologies are designed to run in a baseload capacity, which is to say to consume hydrogen and run throughout the year. And alongside a portfolio that's really saturated with lots of solar and wind throughout much of the year, that might not be as cost effective an option. So that's kind of the rationale or the logic there. I'm scratching my head trying to remember if there was another dimension to that question. Sandy, I don't know if you have the chance to remind me if I missed something there. Oh, yeah, sorry, thank you. So why would we consider hydrogen when it's low efficiency compared to battery storage? The short answer to this one is actually just that hydrogen and battery storage play very different roles in an electricity portfolio. Battery storage is really, really well suited to do what we call daily cycling, which is to say it charges from surplus solar every day and then discharges back to the grid every day. What it's not able to do well is what we call long duration storage, which is to say store up a whole for the period of days or even weeks, and then be ready to discharge it all back to the grid suddenly during very short periods. There are a lot of technologies currently under development or under sort of research stages that would potentially fulfill that need, but hydrogen is one of those technologies. And so in that respect, we don't really view it as a direct competitor or alternative to battery storage.
Great. Thank you for your comments, Sandy and Nick, for your detailed answers there. Quick time check on the 15 minutes that we've got set aside for this. We've got about 5 minutes left, and we do have about 4 more hands raised. But if we do run out of time, I'll take note of the order and get you on the next one. So next up is Pixel 3 XL.
Hi, I'm sorry about that. Actually, it should be Vic, or they call me Solar Vic. I wanted to speak specifically to the concept of the dependence on continuous firm power, and also the long duration energy storage, or LDES. And I think that Pasadena may not realize it or not, but they have pretty much all the infrastructure to realize 100% renewable intermittent energy future currently. And the way you realize that is what's called vehicle to grid. We currently, in the city of Pasadena, have a fleet large enough, the batteries represented in the EV fleet in Pasadena, to actually overmatch our LDES energy needs by 3 or 4 orders of magnitude. And the beauty of vehicle to grid is that, like, it's a distributed approach. So you're able to actually tap into these batteries, and as Nick, you're probably aware of the pilot programs that have worked with schools, where you have the school fleets that operate during the day. They plug them in after the kids are dropped off at their. The fleets are used as a form of demand response. They're absorbing all the excess electrons during the middle of the day, and then they're supporting the grid in the evening, bringing tremendous economic benefit to the school districts, but also facilitating much greater penetration of renewable energy than people prophesied that would be possible. So Pasadena already has pilot programs in place at Caltech. There's a number of other places that have done some preliminary research on it. The California Assembly has got a bill in the very final stages of acceptance, which is going to make all future EVs mandatorily vehicle to grid compatible on an AC basis. So you've got both DC and AC coupling, but either way, and Tony Seba says that there's absolutely categorically no need for anything exotic in terms of long duration energy storage. We don't need gravity. We don't need any of these resources. We've got enough of the kilowatt hours in our current fleet. And the beauty of this fleet is that with each passing year, as the technology evolves, our fleet gets better and better. So you don't get technology bake-in by large stationary battery installations. And again, it's a distributed resource, so it reduces the need to develop the regional distribution transmission resource to facilitate it. Have you looked into that?
We have done work in other jurisdictions looking at the concepts that you're describing, and I believe it's within our scope to look at what we can accomplish with essentially using electric vehicles to shift loads to different times of day and move energy around. So I appreciate the comment, and definitely it's something that we'll want to keep in mind as we proceed with the work.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And we are at time for the time allotted for this second break. But for attendees GHK, Alan Blair, and Jamie Scott, I do see your hands raised. It has not gone unnoted. So at the next break, I will be sure to call on you three in that order. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike Sontag from E3 to finish out the presentation.
Great, thank you. Hey, everybody. My name is Mike Sontag. I'm an associate director here at E3. I'm excited to see so many people show up for an event to talk about energy and decarbonization on a Thursday evening here. So today, as Nick mentioned earlier, I'm going to be talking about our more specific scope of work and the timeline we're working on, all in hopes to accomplish our support of the city for working towards the OSP. So if you go to the next slide here. So just framing this up again, defining an optimized strategic plan, or OSP as we see it here. What we're looking for or looking to produce is a roadmap that will lay out the key steps and future decision points that will best position PWP to achieve its goal to source all electricity from carbon-free resources by the end of 2030. And importantly, as Nick pointed out earlier and David mentioned as well, while maintaining reliability and limiting cost impacts to customers. What will the optimized strategic plan do? We're going to consider how new generation resources, as well as investments in transmission and distribution infrastructure and customer programs, how that can help facilitate the transition to Pasadena's carbon-free goals. And where we see our role being in all of this is to help provide the deeper technical objective analysis to help inform the city and its decision makers to chart a robust path forward in achieving these targets. If you go to the next slide. So what does that scope of work look like more specifically to us? This here is kind of the broader map of all of the phases of work we intend to do. There's a lot of depth into each of these. We're not going to touch it all today, but we're going to step through these here one by one. Again, we are largely getting the project started here. We have draft results in some of the earlier phases, so we're not going to we're not going to get to any of the draft results today. That'll be for a later meeting, but just want to give everybody a sense for where we're headed and what all we intend to do, so that you kind of know where we're going. If you go to the next slide here. So starting in phase one is what we consider the preparatory studies. To date, this has been where most of our work has been in. We're categorizing this into two categories here. Again, these are the different resources that could be procured to help meet the targets. We're looking to characterize those resources. So how much is available, what things they can provide to the grid, either from an energy basis or a reliability basis, as well as how much they cost. The first grouping of resources that we are looking at are what we call distributed resources. So this is what a lot of people have been alluding to, either with behind the meter solar and storage or EVs. Two pieces of this are the distributed solar and storage study. So again, this would be rooftop solar, distributed storage, What is the technical potential for those? What are different adoption scenarios of those technologies? How can that help the city, again, meet the deep clean energy targets along with the reliability characteristics of those? The other distributed resources that we have on our radar are things like demand response and load flexibility. Demand response would be things like, adjusting a thermostat set point during a heat wave or during a grid flex alert. It could also mean things like, managed EV charging or vehicle to grid, as one of the previous speakers was mentioning as well. So, again, we'll be looking at these when the resources are available, how much is, attainable for the city to be building up in the next couple of years, and what all that can help service the grid with. If you go to the next slide. The other grouping of resources is what we call supply side resources. This could be within the city limits of Pasadena. It could also be more regional in the state of California or across the Western United States. But these are all of the things that might look like a more conventional power plant or resource. So the new and emerging technologies, Nick touched on this already. This would be things like hydrogen, hydrogen generation, long duration energy storage. Some of these might be a little more speculative. They're being pursued, across the country. But we are, kind of mapping each of these technologies, how ready for market they might be, again, what technical characteristics they have and how they can contribute to operating the system in a deeply decarbonized world. And, estimates of what the, cost trajectories for those would look like, kind of recognizing the earlier market stage that those technologies are in. The other important piece in this is looking at transmission options. So this would be working with Therujan's team here to understand, again, we saw in Nick's slides earlier that, the Goodrich station currently is a little bit of a bottleneck. So what are the, cost and timing implications to being able to expand that? What are potentially other options to connect to different parts of the system there and be able to tap into, the more diverse resources that Nick was mentioning earlier that can help decarbonize the city in an affordable way. If you go to the next slide. The next phase of work is taking, building on top of all of this, foundational work here. And again, seeing what are all of the, resources that are feasible and possible to install. What are their characteristics? How do they contribute to the system? And, how much will they cost to, build, develop, procure, et cetera. The two big pieces of this analysis are what's first the Glenarm conversion and replacement study. What this one is focused on is all of just grid reliability. How do we keep the lights on through many combinations of weather conditions? Looking out into hotter and hotter days, as one of the previous speakers mentioned as well. Again, this looks at for Glenarm, which is kind of the reliability resource of particular note. Can it be converted? What world does that look like to an alternate fuel such as hydrogen? Or can it be replaced and supplemented by distributed resources more locally to provide that same level of local reliability? And again, through different portfolios we'll be developing, what does that balance of different resources look like to satisfy those requirements? The other element of this is what we call a long-term capacity expansion. This looks at building out grid resources more from an energy and cost perspective. So looking at achieving that emissions target within these cost constraints, within the reliability constraints. For each of these portfolios, we define what is the least cost or cost optimal way to build those pieces all together, kind of in that complex world that Nick was alluding to earlier, to again maintain a reliable system, achieve it in a cost-effective manner, and kind of balance those all in a way such that the resources complement each other well. We are building a couple of portfolios in this that we think will explore the space well. There isn't an unlimited amount to model every last portfolio here, but we've built out a grouping of portfolios that we think characterizes the space well and will give us space to draw between to draw some broader insights into the other phases of this. If you go to the next slide here. So then bringing this all together, we take these portfolios we developed here and look at this next phase is what we call the impact assessment. So looking at the impacts in a couple different ways. First is on a cost perspective. What would all of this cost from a capital cost and upfront cost perspective? That would be in the cost impacts piece in the first box there. Next is looking at more, how does the system operate in that world in an optimal way, and what are the costs of operating that system? We use for this what's called production cost modeling. This would be a model called Plexos, if people are familiar with that. And this looks at for any given hour in the year, for every hour of the year and into the future, given that system as well as the loads on the system. So how much energy is the city of Pasadena as a whole consuming in any given hour? What's the optimal way to be serving all of that load, given the resources that are available in the portfolio that's been built out based on our capacity expansion study? And then lastly, a little bit different than the first two, we're going to look at the distribution system impacts. A lot of this is built around what distributed resources we're baking in here. In particular, the distributed solar and storage, any electrification loads coming online, such as EV charging, and how well all of those loads and resources can be managed kind of in concert with the distribution grid. Again, these are all the poles and wires that run across town, and seeing what the opportunities are to be managing those loads kind of within the constraints of the distribution system, or how much it feasibly could be expanded in a short amount of time, to get as much as we can out of the distribution grid there, and see what impacts these different portfolios might all have in that space. And then lastly, the next slide here, we're going to bring this all together in the final optimized strategic plan. The important word to call out on this is the top of this synthesis. We're going to be synthesizing all of the findings of the earlier studies. Again, we're doing portfolio analysis. It's uncertain if the portfolio that would ultimately get selected or recommended by the city is one that would have been explicitly modeled. There are many other factors besides the more quantitative pieces that we'll be modeling that are worthy of consideration. Risk of pursuing a technology, whether it will develop in time or not. Things that just take a little bit extra qualitative view that we would want to be all synthesizing together when we ultimately make this OSP. I think important too, again, where we see our role in this is providing the objective analysis behind all this to help the broader community and its decision makers make informed decisions on best tracks forward. We kind of think of this for recommended actions of what are so-called least regrets actions, things that the city can be making progress towards, letting emerging technologies develop, getting as much out of resources that we're going to be seeing in any of these worldviews or portfolios, and continuing to make aggressive action to overcome this challenge that everybody else has been talking about of decarbonizing this final 10% of the system. So that's on the scope. If you go to the next slide here, again, speaking to the analysis we're hoping to do, we hope that this is going to be a transparent process. We want to bring everybody along for this year. And, given that, we have a lot of oversight and advisory panels set up along the way to help give us input as we go along. Our bottom left box, we have we E3 here working hand in hand with PWP staff to set up all the technical modeling that we need to accomplish this. We have oversight provided by the city manager's office, as well as our advisory panels here. There's 4 key groups in this. There's the technical advisory panel, which is a group of more technical experts providing advice and insights along the way, deeper in the weeds on our modeling, just helping us along, kind of with the unique on the ground knowledge of Pasadena and its system. The next two, the Municipal Services Committee and the Environmental Advisory Committee or Commission, are made up first for the MSC of the city council members, and then for the EAC among community members. Again, just is having regular touch points with them, either monthly or semi-monthly, to keep them along for the process. And then last but not least, we have all of you here in the community with our public meetings that we have set up along the way here. If you could go to the next slide, just to give you all a sense of the cadence of meetings that we're hosting here, and connecting with everybody down in Pasadena. So far today, we've had 5 technical advisory panel meetings. It's been really important to have those as we've been getting the study off the ground, again, doing all of these preliminary pieces, laying the groundwork for later parts of this. We've met with the Municipal Service Committee twice, and we've also met with the Environmental Advisory Commission, I believe once now, with more to come. We also have beyond today, which is our first community meeting. We plan to have 2 or 3 more of these between now and the end of the study, just to provide updates as we get draft results ready and then work towards a final report. If you go to the next slide, and this is the last one here before we break for the final round of questions here. This is the timeline that we're hoping to accomplish here. We are here in the end of September. We've been working on these preparatory studies kind of since May or June. Getting all of the technical characteristics for each resource and costs all outlined. We're starting to work on the next phase of things, which would be the Glenarm conversion and replacement study, looking at reliability, getting going with the long-term capacity expansion model to see how these resources all balance together to help provide carbon-free energy around the clock here. And then our other efforts have not quite started yet. They'll build on top of these other ones going here. And then the last thing to call out on this timeline here is we have our community meeting here today. I think we're not sure yet what the exact cadence of future meetings will be. And again, it'll either be 2 or 3 to be determined, working with PWP here to lay that all out. But I would expect something around the end of the year, as well as 1 or 2 additional meetings next year in the spring, or working towards the final report deadline in the summer. And that is all the slides I had here. Go to the next one. It's time for the last Q&A break. I don't know if there's any questions in particular about the scope that we wanted to start with, or just open it up to general questions and comments.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Mike. Yeah, no, that sounds good. I wanted to pick up with the queue of the folks that didn't get a chance to ask their questions on the first, so that they don't lose their place in line. So Tommy, are you able to unmute attendee GJK?
Hi, folks. Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Hey, thanks, Jennifer. I appreciate the time. So, really interesting presentation. I appreciate the time and effort to put this in, and I'll put this together. And I'll say I'm a 21-year ratepayer with PWP. So, I appreciate your service and your deep thought into this. So, a few general questions. One of which is, I've heard reference to cost here, but nobody's put any numbers around what this plan will ultimately mean to ratepayers. And when you start making reference to the last 10%, the last mile, or anything of that nature, the costs tend to skyrocket. So I'd like to propose that somewhere on the PWP website, in a user-friendly manner, you put out some of the costs associated with this plan. And as an example, you have a table of resources listed for 2030. How about putting the per megawatt hour or per kW of demand costs associated with those, so folks have some transparency into what these resources are costing, as well as maybe some metrics tracking around what rates are today and then what they will likely evolve to as we move towards green nirvana here in 2030 and beyond. I think that'd be very useful for folks. And then just another general comment, I've heard reference to battery installations within the city limits. Within the last 6 to 12 months, there's been some really high profile issues with batteries and thermal runaway. And there's been a few of those incidents in San Diego. The 15 freeway to Las Vegas was shut down. There was just another incident with a Tesla truck somewhere nearby. I'll throw it out there for comment that, is it a good idea to place one of these installations at the Glenarm facility, where you have not only a large residential population within a half mile, but also a number of schools? And so I'll stop there. I threw out a number of things. Appreciate the time, and I'll go back on mute for responses.
Great. Really appreciate your thoughtful comments there. Anyone on the team want to speak to some of the points raised?
So Nick, do you want to maybe kind of go down throughout the OSP where the cost impacts will be studied through the electric rate study, and how that's going to all come together?
Sure, I'll say a few things about this. So if we back up maybe 1 or 2 slides, actually maybe 3 slides. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So I'll just point out that assessing the cost impacts of these different portfolios that we'll be studying is certainly part of our scope, and it's an important enough part that it kind of got its own study within this process. And as we support the city with our objective analysis, we'd expect that we'd want to provide the full transparency as to how those cost metrics play out, depending on which combinations of solutions that you pursue. I think it would ultimately be up to Pasadena to decide how to display that information, if it's a public-facing dashboard or something of the sort. Real quick, before anyone else jumps in, I'll say a few things about the battery storage incidents that you've referenced. Of course, we're tracking those closely, and we've observed others, not only the ones that you've referenced, but earlier on in the young history of battery storage at grid scale. and it absolutely is a risk. That said, there's a tremendous amount of work that is being done as we design more and more of these systems to explore it. What I'll say about it in the context of the OSP is that with batteries, as with all technologies that we would be considering, we just want to emphasize full transparency about not only what are the costs of those resources, but what are the risks. I think ultimately it will be up to City Council and other to make the trade-offs as to the appropriate balance between costs and risks and other considerations in any of these paths.
Great, thank you for that. So Alan Bear, you had your hand raised on the previous session. Were you still interested in asking your question during this time? I see that you are. Okay, great. Tommy, please go ahead and unmute.
Hi. Thanks. Listening to this conversation, I really appreciate one, Pasadena is having these meetings, and two, really living within PWP's district and not one of the other larger investor-owned utilities. And I appreciate all the efforts that PWP is making to clean up our electricity. So my first thought is, the point was made about limited roof space within the city of Pasadena and, of course, the bottleneck at the Goodrich plant. So that just strikes me that the importance of using 100% of that roof space that we have, which is good for solar. And it's a high opportunity cost if we only use a quarter or some small part of those solar roofs. So is that being considered? Are you considering some means of maximizing the usage of the good roof space within the city? A second question is the NREL Solar App Plus is a great way to standardize and systemize solar permitting. It should reduce the staff load and the costs of implementing solar in the city of Pasadena within our Goodrich, within our area. And is that something that Pasadena has looked into, or would you look into for facilitating development of solar within the city? Thirdly, I do like Sam's energy arbitrage idea, if there's a way we can pull it off. And given the complications around battery storage, such as fire that were just mentioned, that reminds me of the attractiveness of things like gravity storage and hydro storage. And gravity storage has a very small footprint. I wonder if you are looking into things like gravity storage, like the California Gravity Storage Company or Energy Vault, that have a very small footprint for storage and can be seasonal storage. And then my last thought is with respect to demand response, converting from things like air conditioning to heat pump mini split systems is hugely more efficient than conventional cooling, but it's quite expensive. And Pasadena currently has a $300 incentive for that, which is insignificant. It's laughable. So is Pasadena, how about, would you look at, is what you're doing, is it within the realm of what you're doing to consider higher rebates or incentives for things like heat pumps to reduce demand? Thank you.
Great. I think I can speak to some of the parts about the rebates. So, we're constantly reviewing some of the information that we've got to make sure, is this a meaningful, incentive to switch over to some more energy efficient technologies. And, as part of the studies that we're doing here with E3, and we also undergo feasibility, not feasibility, what's the word I'm looking for? I got my team member on the line who's probably yelling at me with the terminology. But anyway, we've got a lot of efforts to look internally on whether or not those programs are up to date. And we do adjust accordingly. So that's something we're constantly looking at. On the solar permitting side, that's through our planning department. That's something we're also keeping an eye on. We are very aware that there is sort of an administrative burden and roadblock to getting rooftop solar there. That's something that we're aware of, and we want to work with our planning department to streamline that process. So all of these things are on our radar and are on the table. So hopefully that answers most of your questions there, but I do thank you for your patience in waiting to ask your question. Next up, we have Jamie Scott, who was the last person in line on the last session.
Okay. Can you hear me okay? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay,
Go right ahead.
good. Yeah, so I wanted to talk about or ask you about the rate situation, because it seems to me like right now in Pasadena, we have rooftop solar, and the rate structure is not based on, I think you guys are going to be maybe getting smart meters or not. I keep hearing yes and then no and then yes and then no. Anyway, but right now what it is that it's really cheap up to, I guess it's 300 kilowatt hours. And then between 300 and 700, you pay 14 cents per kilowatt hour. And then weirdly, above 700, it goes down to 10 cents a kilowatt hour. This is all for residential, not commercial. And which seems weird because that's like, please use more energy. Why don't you? Anyway, so I first wanted to kind of raise that as what the heck are you guys doing that for? And then also to say that if it's true that people like who have rooftop solar now, no matter, when we're creating that rooftops, well, it's, obviously during the day, but compared to what the market price is, we're getting 14 cents a kilowatt hour. So my guess is that one way or another, that's going to go away because middle of the day rooftop solar production is just not going to be, quote, cost effective for the city. And that's where batteries come in. And so I really like what Solar Vic had to say about, using cars. But I thought that the governor actually turned back an assembly bill or whatever it was about requiring the fact that the car batteries could then, when charged, could then go into the grid. Like right now, I think like Tesla trucks can do it, but our car can't, for instance, our regular Tesla can't do it. So I'm looking at that going, okay, well, so if we had a battery, then we could sell our energy back to the city when, it's when they need it. But we have no way of doing that right now unless we buy a battery. So I'm kind of just wondering, what are you guys looking at in terms of rates and, equality, I guess you want to say, or whatever. But also, it just seems to me, are you looking at 14 cents a kilowatt hour in the future? Like, what's going on?
Okay, Lynn, you want to take this one?
Hi. Yeah, sure. So I'm Lynn Chamowitz. I'm the Assistant General Manager for Finance and Administration. So we are conducting sort of in parallel and also using all of the inputs from the OSP for the electric rate study, which we're going to have a kickoff meeting. We were actually supposed to go to Municipal Services Committee this week to introduce the electric rate study, which is going to look at all of these components. The OSP is really focused on the power supply side of things for the most part, but the electric rates comprise different components such as customer service, and the rates that you were speaking of initially regarding, the first 350 kilowatt hours and then the rate changes, that is actually the component of rates that are for the distribution portion. So that just has to do with how the wires are charged for and costs are allocated on that part. So as far as the energy usage, that is just a flat per kilowatt hour charge. So we have what's called an unbundled rate. So you have different rate components billed in a slightly different way. But again, all of those aspects regarding the rates, we're going to use the inputs from the OSP into the electric rate studies and then have these kinds of conversations. There will also be extensive outreach and communication and public input regarding the rates specifically to make sure that we're capturing the values of Pasadena when we're asking our customers to pay the rates to support some of these policy decisions.
Okay, sorry about that. So we are a little over time, but Greg A., it looks like you've not had an opportunity to speak this evening. So if you want to go ahead and mute, and we'll allow some time for you to ask your question.
Sure. Hey, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks for the presentation. Yeah, I was wondering if it's within the scope to look at creative ways around contracting rooftop solar and lowering the cost of installation, because it's my understanding that rooftop solar is significantly more expensive on a per kilowatt hour basis than large commercial installation. So I'm thinking like, okay, what if you go to a solar contractor and say like, oh, you're going to install solar on 50 houses in our town, that kind of thing. Maybe that lowers some of their costs. So I'm just wondering if there if it's within the scope to look at creative ways of lowering the cost of rooftop solar installations.
Well, we'll definitely take a note of that and consider that option in the future. Nick, did you want to say anything else?
Yeah, maybe I'll just add that, within the context of the local solar and storage study, we certainly do want to highlight that there are a wide variety of mechanisms or contract structures or rates that could be used to procure or develop local solar resources. I'm not sure we'll get down quite to the level of detail that you just referenced with respect to your example on the 50 rooftops, but we do want to kind of convey the sort of wide range of options that are out there today and that people are using to try to push forward some of these types of resources at lower and lower costs.
Cool, thanks.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and go to that final slide here. It's just to kind of close things out. Really want to thank everyone for attending this meeting tonight. Again, just to remind you, we will be posting these slides and a recording in the coming days to the website you see here, pwweb.com. /OSP. Also, if you noted earlier, Mike did mention there were going to be some additional community meetings later this year and maybe even early next, but we will keep you apprised of those. You're welcome to follow us on our social media channels, Twitter, X, and of course, there's that email address again. You're welcome to reach out to us directly. Thank you again and have a good evening.